So I'm a little bit late to the party, but I was finally able to watch Scream. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your thoughts on Scream, as this is a spoiler-free and spoiler review. If you haven't seen the movie yet, be careful if you head down into the comment section. The way this is going to work is that I will talk about my spoiler-free thoughts right at the beginning, then I'll give a gigantic spoiler warning, and I'll go into my spoiler thoughts on the film. Also, there are little chapter markers down below if you want to skip ahead to my discussion of a specific character, specific plot twist in the film, but the chapter markers don't contain spoilers. You don't need to be worried about that. So Scream was one of my top 10 most anticipated films of the year. The original Scream is my favorite horror film of all time, so naturally I was very excited to check this one out. And I was invited to a press screening, which, since the original is my favorite horror film, that's just really cool to me that I was going to get to see the new film early at a press screening. But the couple of days leading up to that press screening, my daughter had been homesick with a fever, and she'd been testing negative for COVID, and I took a COVID test right before I was supposed to head on out just to be responsible, just to make sure I wasn't sick. And it came back positive, and then starting that night, I had flu-like symptoms and was kind of wiped out for a couple of days. And then for the last 2 weeks, I've just been anxiously waiting to be able to check out this film. My case of COVID, I was really minor. It wasn't a particularly big deal for me and my family, but it did make its way through my entire household over the last 2 weeks. So that's the story behind why I wasn't able to see this film when it first came out, and I had to wait a little bit to responsibly be able to go to a theater and see the film. But I have now seen the film, so let's get started with my spoiler-free review of the film. So as I said earlier, this was one of my most anticipated films of the year. They hired the directors of Ready or Not to direct the film because Wes Craven passed away a few years ago, and I thought they were just the right team for this particular project because of the tone that they captured with Ready or Not. I thought that would translate really nicely to the Scream franchise. While not being a copy of what Craven had done with those films, you could see how they would fit the film well. But I was concerned that they'd be able to have the proper meta commentary. So much of what made the original film so good in that original run was the commentary on the slasher genre from the previous 15 years. And that movie was both a send-up of all the tropes of the genre while being a movie that celebrated the genre at the same time. And I thought it just merged all of that so well. And while I enjoyed the fourth film, that's what I felt was missing from it, was proper kind of meta commentary that felt right for the film. And I am so happy to say that I thought this was a great continuation of the franchise that captured the slasher genre as well as the meta commentary just right. At its core, it continues kind of the whodunit paranoia, and I thought in particular this movie did a really good job of pointing the finger at a whole bunch of different people, and you weren't sure where it was headed all throughout the runtime of the movie, and they put up a bunch of red herrings, they put a bunch of weird behavior with a bunch of characters, and then slowly killed them off until we found out who the real killers were. In the movie, you do get a number of just really violent kills where, I mean, you see the knife go through body parts and then the blood start to trickle down, and it's just real gnarly stuff that you want from a movie like this. Another thing I was a little bit worried about going into it is, would I care about the new characters? And I thought they found a way, especially with Sam, the lead character, to tie her into the franchise in a way that I wasn't anticipating. I went into the movie managing to successfully avoid all of the spoilers except for the one brief cameo that's in a YouTube video. I won't say what it is until the spoiler section. That was the only thing that I had spoiled for me. Otherwise, I watched this at one, and as it had the reveals about Sam's background and the kills and everything, all of it were great surprises. And what they did with the Sam character and her ties into the franchise, I thought that was just really interesting, really smart, and made her character have the great dynamic throughout everything. And then kind of you have all the side characters around her that at first I didn't warm up to them, but as you went through the movie, I thought they were used nicely in the film to kind of balance things out. And then we have the legacy characters returning, and one of the things I thought the movie did really well was balancing new characters and legacy characters, where you liked the new characters, but you always appreciate it when the legacy characters returned. But the legacy characters had something to do, but they didn't overshadow the new characters. They were a nice spice. They were a nice appearance in the film. They were used just the right amount that they didn't take over the film, but that you also didn't feel like, oh man, that was just cameos. Why were they even in the movie? No, they balanced it just about right. And another thing that really surprised me about this movie is that it's probably the most emotionally resonant of the Scream films. And most of that comes from the way that it treats the legacy characters where they're at in life and their relationship to each other, because we care about them. You care about the conflicts that they've had with one another. And likewise, with what they do with the Sam character and her ties to the franchise's past and history, they just make her this very kind of troubled character in an interesting new way where you care about her journey, that as twists, turns, reveals happen, you actually feel something. There's an emotional resonance to it. And that's what really kind of surprised me about this movie. And then my biggest concern going into the movie, would it have the appropriate meta commentary? And I think they nailed it, which was to say the original Scream was a slasher film commenting on slasher films, celebrating them, leaning into all the tropes, but commenting on it while it did it. And what this movie smartly realized about itself is that right now we're in the era of rebootquels, these legacy sequels where they continue a franchise, but it's a soft reboot. It's designed to be a new on-ramp for new viewers, but a continuation for the old viewers. And they went, we are one of those movies. We'll do that, and that's what our meta commentary will be. And then likewise tying that in with fan culture, which makes so much sense in light of this franchise, with the way the characters in these movies know that they're in horror films, therefore using the fandom as an element of the story and the characters makes a lot of sense. And I thought it was just perfectly done, like just the exact right direction to take at this point in time. But I don't think the movie as a whole was perfect. I thought the movie had a few kind of weak points in it. And without going into too many spoilers, there's one of the kills that takes place that's very important to the film, where I felt in order for this moment to happen, the characters had to be uncharacteristically stupid. They have to act outside of the way these characters would behave in light of being characters in these movies. Even the choice that is made shows that the person has an awareness, but they act outside of that awareness in order for a certain moment to take place in the film. And it cheapened what should have been, I think, a better moment, because I think the writing at that point was just a little bit weak to get to the moment. And then when you get to the final reveal of the whodunit, I was okay with it. I felt it fit the story. It made sense in light of what they were trying to explore and communicate with the film. I didn't think it had a much emotional weight to it, though. So it was like, okay, yeah, that fits. I'm okay with this. I'm not mad about it. I'm also not like, oh, wow, that's amazing. So a movie that's all about the whodunit, the actual answer to the whodunit, was one of the weaker elements of the film. Well, not overtly being bad. I had some people messaging me about how they thought it was just terrible. I wouldn't agree with that. I felt it fit what they were doing with the film and saying with the film, but that doesn't mean that it also made me go, wow, that was amazing at the same time. Now, one question I've received a number of times over the last few days is, do you need to watch the first 4 Scream films before you watch this film? Technically speaking, this movie stands on its own. It makes sense by itself. You can watch it by itself. You'll be able to follow what's taking place. It explains everything you need to know from the previous film. So technically speaking, no. What is my recommendation? Do not watch this film before you watch the previous 4 Scream films. First off, they're really good. Besides maybe 3, they're really good. You should just watch them. And tied to that, this movie will spoil those movies for you. You will know who survives. You'll know who the killers are. And this movie is so built on those previous films that it just cheapens the effect of watching them for the first time if you watch this one first. So technically you can, please watch at least Screams 1, 2, and 4 before you watch this film. What do I score Scream? I'm going to give this one an A- and a 9 out of 10. I thought it was a very good continuation of the franchise. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Just one of the kills that was too important to be weakly written, frustrated me a little bit. The final reveal didn't pay off as well as I think it should have. Besides that, a great continuation. If you're a fan of the Scream franchise, of course you need to watch this movie. If you like horror movies, you should check this one out. And if you're new to the Scream franchise, I'm sorry I'm giving you homework, but yeah, go watch the previous 4 films, then absolutely go watch this film too. From there, let's start talking about spoilers. First thing I want to talk about is the cold open, which is clearly designed to mirror the original film with the girl getting the phone call about scary movies. But in the case of this one, the phone call is about the stab movies, which is like this layered types of meta on top of meta commentary, while setting up the tone for this film of it's commenting on itself and its own existence. And also another thing that the intro does is that it does the first example of many times in this film where it mirrors the original Scream movie, but at the same time leads to a different outcome. So in the original Scream, Drew Barrymore is the star of the opening sequence, but then gets killed off, setting the film in motion. In this film, the girl survives, setting the film in motion, and in its own way sets up the kind of the paranoia of this film of you really don't know who is up to whatsy, because the movie does a number of things to point the finger at the initial victim. She could be in on the whole scheme for everything kind of going on here. Multiple times it teases that in certain ways, and that's what the movie continues to do. Sets up an expectation of like, we're doing that again, but then something different ends up happening with the film. Then let's talk about the Sam character. The big thing to discuss here is that she is Billy Loomis's daughter. So she is the daughter of the killer from the original film that back when he was dating Sydney, also had a side girl that he was hooking up with. She got pregnant, thus leading to this character in this film. And this is information that kind of led her to have a lot of trouble as a teenager when she discovered this. It kind of broke her whole family up, leading to certain family dynamics, tension with her sister who didn't know this information. And thus also leading to this kind of element in the film where she's seeing visions of her dead father as this killer, kind of giving her advice all throughout the entire film. And thus kind of leading to this, like, could she be the killer of, like, in the perspective of, like, she's actually a little bit crazy and following in his footsteps, and maybe she doesn't know what's kind of going on here. There's teasing that even our protagonist could be the killer in the film. And as you kind of go into the finale, I think one of the nice payoffs here is that you have the kind of this crazy person voice in her head, the devil on her shoulder, the killer from the original film, pointing her to kill people throughout the entire film. And you get to the end of the movie and you can provide a moment where the protagonist picks up a knife and just starts stabbing like a killer into the actual killer of the film. And it's like, that's kind of fun to see, of a nice payoff of the protagonist getting to be the killer in the movie, and it makes sense in light of what's been set up, the character development, but doesn't make the character a full villain in another sense. Just like, that's probably a bit excessive for a normal protagonist, but it makes sense in this context. Then we've got Tara and her friends, and early on, I suspected she might end up being the killer when Sam comes and confronts her, tells her what's really been going on, and she gets mad at her. And whenever someone survives an attack in these movies, you immediately go, okay, does that potentially mean that they are the killer, in light of that being so much of what happened in the first film and the plot of the villains to hurt each other, to throw people off the track. So when she survives and she's clearly very angry, learning the truth from her sister, you go, okay, could that be where this is headed as the plot of the movie? Then other points in time in the movie kind of likewise point fingers at her with different things that kind of happen when she survives, what's kind of happening. That kind of made me think maybe she was up to no good. And then you meet kind of her group of friends from high school, and they're all super suspicious. They're super sus. All of them with the way that they're behaving and things. But when they're first introduced, I went in and immediately warm up to them, and I suspect some of that's just the original high schoolers in the film were characters that are only supposed to be 4 or 5 years older than I am. They were about the same generationally, just a little bit ahead of me, whereas now the high schoolers in this movie are 20 years younger than me. So I just naturally gravitate toward 90s high schoolers more so than Gen Z high schoolers. And so at first I didn't warm up to them, but as the movie went along, I was like, these characters are actually really working. This is like actually makes sense and it balances. And once I spent a little bit more time with them, they didn't annoy me quite as much, and I had a lot more kind of fun with them. And that's one of the things the movie just did really well, is introducing a set of characters that are different, have different qualities, characteristics, and flesh out the story nicely in the way that they respond to kind of everything taking place, and even a friend of theirs dying. Then we'll talk about Dewey and Gale. So we're first reintroduced to Dewey, who's kind of in a bad spot in life where him and Gale have split up, but clearly he still really likes her, still watches her on TV. He's no longer a sheriff, and Sam comes to him for help, and he's reluctant at first and goes back and forth and decides to do the right thing, step in to try and help. But his first reaction is call Sydney and say, don't come here no matter what. Do not come here. It's dangerous. And then follow up is to send a text to Gale saying, don't come here. It's happening again. And of course, the way that he sends it is so Dewey, of like, he's doing the right thing, but in such a doofus way. Like, killings are happening again. Don't come here. Since it is a text, and they said enough of a reason, like, why he's sending a text, because she's on the air, and at the same time you're like, Dewey, man, what are you doing? And throughout the previous 4 films, Dewey's always been the doofus, the goofy guy that's kind of the hero, but not as heroic as he really should be, or you want him to be. And I felt this movie did a better job of making him less of a doofus. And when you have a guy that's 50 years old or whatever, I don't think it plays nearly as well to being just the goofy guy anymore. So you want to be true to who he always was, but you can't have him be as goofy as he was, especially in the first couple of films. And I thought they did a nice job of maturing him, kind of growing him up. And so when Gale comes to town, because that's of course what Gale would do, you kind of get the conversation between the two of them, reflecting on what's going on. And it just done really nicely of, she was never a small town girl, and he was never big city guy. They were always an odd couple, and that's what made them fun, is that they were so different, but still kind of drawn to each other, in which case it would make sense that they would that they would be kind of torn apart. It made less sense that they were actually ever together in light of the way that each of them was kind of written, the moments, the tensions. There's just enough there that there's reasons to tear them apart. And at the same time, clearly had a chemistry with one another that you rooted for them at the same time. And I think you just see that very much in the interactions that they had, that neither one of them stopped caring about each other. Both, even the ways that they reacted to their change of life, of her taking this job, him trying to make it work, seemed consistent with things about who each of them were, that just the little ways that we avoid conflict, that we don't have the conversations that we should have, tear people apart. And you just see that so much in kind of what plays out here. And then I think I mentioned a frustrating kill in the non-spoiler section. That was Dewey. If you've seen the movie, you almost certainly could have guessed that. And the problem you run into is you have this fight where he's fighting Ghostface, and there's other people there, and it seemed like very much that he was going to get taken out by the knife, and then he ends up winning the fight. And that whole time I was thinking, like, why isn't any of those other people joining in? Like, I understand there's injuries, there's sisters, and I understand there's other elements, but like, there's literally like a killer right there. That's the most urgent thing, is like, stop the killer, and killer's doing this on top of someone, you could smack him on the head. So right there I was like, one of these other people could join in and do something to try and help Dewey. But so Dewey gets the upper hand, grabs the gun, shoots Ghostface, and you're like, yes, they did it. That's it. And I thought, that's interesting. Like, we're going to find out who one of the Ghostfaces is early in the movie, but because they killed Ghostface, or this one, you don't find out who the other one is. That's what I thought was about to happen. And that's an interesting direction to go, because we always find out at the very end, but what if we found out early, and then that sets in motion like their set of clues to try and track down the other person. Maybe there's misdirects, because no, that's not what happens. They start walking off. They're about to get in the elevator, and then Dewey goes, wait, they're never dead at first. And at a certain point in time, you're straining, like, I know that was so much the gag that was playing off the trope of horror movies and action movies, that there's always one final jump scare. But at a certain point in time, you're straining a lot of credibility when you do this. If you're shot point blank in the chest with a pistol, and as now as a high school girl, you're shot in the chest with a pistol point blank multiple times, you have a bunch of cracked ribs. Like it's not like bulletproof vests are also like super padded vests where it's like feels like someone flicked you in the chest. That's an extremely painful experience to be shot in a bulletproof vest. So Joey's, if they're not shot in the head, they're not really dead. So he acknowledges he knows the rules of these movies, but then he basically does, I'll be right back. He doesn't say I'll be right back, but he does an I'll be right back. You guys go down, I will go handle this by myself. And immediately you go, he's breaking the rules of these movies. He's about to die. And so then dramatic music plays as he walks up and then walks up reloading his gun. So his gun's not reloaded until he's right within stabbing range, in which case the high school girl is able to overpower the grown man. The high school girl who's been shot in the chest 3 times has a bunch of cracked ribs, gets right up and is able to achieve a very strong physical feat of gutting someone with knives and things like that. Which I haven't gutted anyone yet, but might say that's probably the easiest thing to do. I don't mind that he died. I don't mind when he died. I don't mind the context under which he died. This felt like the moment that they needed to do a little bit more time on to earn the moment better. I don't feel this was earned. Like, you could tell they wanted to give Dewey a heroic moment of Dewey stops Ghostface, shoots Ghostface, but then they immediately undo it. In a way that just, he knows the rules of these movies. He knows you got to shoot him in the head, but he doesn't know, don't go there alone. Don't stay behind alone with the killer. He doesn't know that. I don't buy that. And even the way it kind of plays out, that they walk, they're all standing right there because they just wait 1 second. We're going to stand 5 feet back because the villain, that guy has a knife. They're going to come back for one final stab. Better stand back just a little bit so I can't get stabbed. Boom. But he doesn't do that. He acknowledges he knows what's about to happen and then walks into the trap. That's frustrating. That pulled the movie down for me. Then let's talk about Sydney real quick in here. And she's not in the movie as much, but I think that fit. She gets something to do. You catch up on where she's at in life. You get her trying to help. They make it clear that she's not passive. They make it clear that she's not someone that's dramatically changed. They didn't make her this cynical person. I'm not, I don't help people like that. I put that, it's none of that. She comes to save the day, and then she's involved in the third act, gets in on the action. So I thought it was handled just the right amount, and that, of course, she's moved away from this terrible city, and then at the same time, when something happens to Dewey, of course she's going to come back. Of course she's going to try and help. Of course she's thinking ahead and sending trackers and doing all this stuff. She's played this game. She knows what to do. She steps in on the action. And so I didn't have anything particularly interesting to say about there because there wasn't as much there that kind of happens with her. Except to say that both Gale and her, when you bring them into the third act, they're out for revenge. And they're much more motivated going into this third act than any of the previous ones because their role isn't to survive. And that's kind of fun. That previously, let's get out of here. We don't want to die. We don't want this to happen. This time it's, we want to go kill the killer because they killed Dewey. And this is not going to keep happening. And so then that's kind of you even have Gale's been shot. It's no, I'm going in there. We're going to go kill this person. And then so when you get to the final moment where they're battling one of the 2 killers or the specific killer that killed Dewey, they give the death to her. It's just a horrible death of getting fried and blown to pieces, which is just a great hand. Yes, that's what we want to have happen to this character because they are horrible and playing games. They're manipulative. Let's fry their face off and blow them to pieces while they're begging for their life. That's a nice, satisfied death. When you do something that gives our characters a motivation to take out the person, that's personal, I want that revenge to be satisfying. I thought they did a nice job in this one. Next, the last thing I want to talk about is the meta commentary. As I previously said, this was my biggest concern going into the movie, that basically we were going to just get another slasher movie in line with the Scream franchise that's talking about slasher films, making jokes, referencing movies, but didn't have anything fresh, interesting to say about the movie itself. And that couldn't be further from the truth. If anything, this one might even out Scream and how meta its commentary is. And like it's a movie that really understood how to comment on itself and knew what it was and just interwove that all throughout the dialogue, the nature of the story, the beats that play the same, the beats that play different, that turn on their head, and then even the villain reveal. All of it is intertwined with just a really strong understanding of where movies are at right now, which is we just keep getting these legacy sequels, these rebootquels, these soft reboots, and people keep buying tickets to them, but a bunch of them are angering fans. Some of them that fans are loving, a bunch of them the fans are hating, a bunch of them make fans feel betrayed, some of them make fans feel like this was a love letter. They understand that's where the genre is at, and therefore tried to craft a movie that could comment on all of that while being that, trying to be the love letter, trying to be true to it. And I think they found the right spot in the middle of it. They found that place to where they just got it. Like what they needed to do. What's the thing that you comment on right now? That this is a rebootquel. We are a rebootquel, so we'll be a rebootquel. We'll do all the things rebootquels do, and we're gonna comment on it while it's happening. And we're in a horror movie, so let's talk about the other thing going on in horror movies right now: elevated horror. Horror with social commentary. And so let's have, instead of our teenage characters being in love with the slasher genre, they're in love with the current genre or current era of horror films, which a lot of them are elevated horror, and a bunch of them are these rebootquels, and it comments on all of that. And you have that discussion in the movie, and it played like the way conversations on the internet in my comment section play out about a bunch of these movies, except it's the characters in this movie as it's happening to them. That made a whole bunch of sense, which will lead into the answer to our whodunit. And so let's move into the final section, the final reveal of our killers. And as I said before, I thought it was okay. Thematically, it fit with that rebootquel stuff of, okay, what's the thing that makes sense right now? There's all this conversation about toxic fandoms. You have all of these fandoms that are angry at their creators for ruining their franchises that they loved. And so we're making a rebootquel. That's the context under which people get so potentially angry. Now let's take that and take it to the most crazy extreme you could, which is people are so angry about the last Stab movie that they decide to write their own Stab movie to give better source material to the creators for the next one. That fits thematically with the movie that they were making, the ideas that they were tackling, fits really even nicely in with the franchise itself. Like all of that ties in, it makes sense. Emotionally, it wasn't all that satisfying when it's like, okay, once again, it's the boyfriend and just the person that goes along with it. Like that side to it was like, okay. I don't hate this. It makes sense. It doesn't feel as satisfying when it's like, yeah, two people met on a message board on the internet. They're both massive fans of the franchise, and they took it like that. Doesn't emotionally pay off very well. And then it just ties into things that have been in there all along with, back to the second movie of all of the movies, almost all of them except the third one. There's this element of people wanting fame, elements of people being influenced by the movies. That kind of phraseology has kind of always been in there. Of course, the boyfriend returning, which fits. That you're repeating ideas fits with the rebootquel idea, but it just didn't. It seemed like there were some other ideas potentially in there that could have been a little bit more, more interesting, or hit with a more oomph to it. If you'd not just, oh yeah, these two random people in the movie, it was them. you make it the sister and you have some really good explanation. You make the protagonist the actual antagonist. Something like that I think could have been more shocking, more extreme, that if you build it right, really pays off and is like, wow, they blew our minds. And instead I think ever since the first movie, I don't think the reveals have been as meaningful. It's been like, okay, yeah, it was that person. Okay, cool. And whereas in the first one, it just like felt this ultimate betrayal when you learned of what was really going on. And wait, there was two of them. One of them had a personal motivation. The other one is just a psycho friend that's a bad influence. And then this is just feels like another one where it's kind of like, yeah, it was those people. I think there was like I said, it fits thematically. It does fit with the story they were telling. And that's what's kind of tricky when you're trying to comment on the genre, have a character study, have interesting ideas about what if the lead character is kind of haunted by her dead father, not literally, haunted by her dead father who's a psychopath. Putting voices in her head like that. There's some interesting ideas introduced all throughout this movie, and just some of the red herrings feel like they could have been better. Now, I will say this. Because I went in kind of late, I a week after everyone else saw it, I saw enough thumbnails and stuff that I something was up with Dewey, and I didn't know if that's because he died or if they're going to make him the killer. And I saw people comparing this movie to The Last Jedi, and I haven't watched any of his videos. I don't know what the comparison to The Last Jedi is. Maybe you guys can tell me in the comment section. Or I'm sure you will tell me in the comment section. So I was afraid that they were going to make like Dewey the killer. If they did something like that, I would hate that. I'd read that Kirby returned in the movie, so I kept waiting throughout the movie for Kirby to show up. Turns out it was just a cameo and a thumbnail, which I'm fine if that's all it was. But seeing that she returned like made me think that she was going to show up more prominently, or she's going to show up as a hero in the third act as one more person showing up to stop Ghostface, or the mask comes off and it's Kirby, and I would hate that. So I was waiting for what they're going to do. I didn't want that direction, but I think maybe something with our lead character or her sister, there might have been something there that could have been more emotional weight. But like I said, thematically, I don't think it would have fit as well with what had come before. Unless you make maybe her sister the person that is obsessed with the stab movies when she learned that her family's part of that legacy. And maybe something like that could have been interesting. But anyway, like I said, I thought it was a great continuation that, same for the way the Dewey plot point happened, I don't mind the plot point. I think the writing of the moment needed to be better. And then the final reveal, I think, thematically fit, but I think it could have, once again, could have been, it didn't have the emotional oomph with the characters that it was. Oh, is that person and that person? Okay. Oh, cool. That was okay. Everything else, I thought was just that it was exactly what I wanted. I don't want to spoil my ranking, but I think this is one of the best movies in the franchise. It's very strong contender, way up there with the original, lived up to it great. So that's my take on it. Let me know what you thought down below in the comment section. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.